Hey guys, tonight we set sail through the murky, moldy underbelly of pirate life. The version no one puts on t-shirts or in theme park rides. You're not going to hear much about parrots or treasure maps tonight. Instead, imagine this. The salty sting of sea spray crusting on your face. The creak of splintering wood under bare, blistered feet, and a stench so awful you actually get used to it. This is your life now, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this journey. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It all starts in a dark, damp alley in a port town you'd rather forget. You're not exactly born into wealth. In fact, you're not born into much of anything at all. Just another kid scraping through life. Your fingernails crusted with the grime of dockside survival. Sleeping in abandoned barrels or under leaking roofs. If you're lucky, your teeth have never known a toothbrush. Education, that's for the merchant's sons. You grow up fast. By the time you're 12, you already know how to gut a fish, swipe a loaf of bread, and disappear before the baker can holler. There's not much future here for someone like you. The sea is always there, glittering with a kind of ugly promise. It takes as much as it gives mostly takes, but every time you see a ship leave harbor, its sails flapping like some great beast's wings, you imagine escape, not just from the stink and struggle of your port town, but from the hopelessness that clings like a second skin. Your dreams aren't exactly noble. They're full of gold coins, overflowing goblets, and silk shirts that don't itch. You hear whispers in the taverns about pirates, men who answer to no one, who make their own rules, who feast and drink and fight and laugh louder than anyone else. You're just desperate enough to believe those tales. So one morning, you climb onto a crate, squint toward the horizon, and make the decision. You'll be a pirate. Never mind that you've never touched a sword. Never mind that you get seasick watching a boat bob in the harbor. You're convinced it's your only ticket out. You start by hanging around the docks, offering to scrub decks or carry barrels. It's disgusting, back-breaking work, but it gets you noticed. Eventually, a grizzled sailor with more scars than teeth waves, you aboard a dingy little sloop. You want to crew, he growls. You nod like your life depends on it because, frankly, it does. That's your start. No ceremony, no secret handshake, just a moldy hammock, a biscuit full of weevils, and a rope-burned hand from hauling sails in a windstorm. No one welcomes you. No one teaches you. You learn by watching and bleeding. It's cold, then it's hot, then it's cold again. The wind slaps your face raw, and when you sleep, you dream of drowning. But you stay, because somehow, even this misery feels better than your old life. At least here, there's motion. At least here, you're going somewhere event, if it's straight to the bottom of the sea. The ship you're on isn't even a pirate ship yet. It's a merchant vessel with a suspiciously angry crew and a captain with debts he doesn't like talking about. One night, while you're coiling rope in the dark, you overhear whispers, plans, mutiny, a sharp turn in your fate. The crew's sick of following rules. They want freedom, gold, all the usual lies, and you're too new to stop it, too scared to flee. So when the captain is stabbed in his sleep and tossed overboard like a sack of potatoes, you simply keep coiling your rope. The next morning, you're part of a pirate crew. That's how it happens more often than not, quietly, violently, without much ceremony. Historians still argue whether most pirates were born rebels or simply desperate men pushed too far. In your case, it's definitely desperation. You're not even sure you believe in gold anymore. You just know you're stuck now. There's no going back to land without risking the noose. So you settle into your new life. You eat when there's food. You sleep when the rats aren't biting. And you sail toward whatever target your new captain points at. You learn quickly that pirate life is more boredom than battle. Days stretch into each other, humid and hot and humming with flies. You pass the time patching sails, gutting fish, and swatting at fleas. Everyone stinks. Everyone's angry. You've stopped caring what day it is. Time is measured in the number of rotting potatoes left in the hold. You also learn that pirates don't just attack any ship. They're picky. Merchant vessels are best slow, lightly armed, usually full of boring but valuable stuff like sugar and cloth. You imagine chests of gold and glowing jewels, but what you usually get are barrels of molasses or soggy bales of tobacco. And yet, somehow, it's all still worth something. The ship you're on gets renamed some grand, ridiculous name that makes the captain feel powerful. Something like the Crimson Widow or Neptune's Curse. Doesn't matter. The name gets painted in red across the side, probably with chicken blood. Intimidation matters more than accuracy. You're given a dagger, not because anyone thinks you're ready to fight, but because they figure you'll die trying anyway, so you might as well flail usefully. Your first raid is terrifying and boring at the same time. Hours of quiet sailing, days of watching the horizon and then, all at once, panic. The crew swarms like hornets. Cannons fire. Smoke fills your lungs. You can't tell if you're deaf or just overwhelmed. You swing a rope, miss the deck, land on someone's back, get elbowed in the nose, and bleed all over your own shirt. That's your contribution. The battle lasts 5 minutes. No one dies. The merchant captain surrenders immediately, crying and clutching a pocket watch. You loot the ship for all it's worth, which turns out to be not very much. Still, there's celebration. Grog is passed around, diluted, disgusting, and somehow still better than seawater. You drink until you forget the smell of blood and smoke. Somewhere in the haze, someone declares you a real pirate now, which you find funny, considering your hands are still shaking. That night, while lying in your hammock, your face swollen and your stomach turning from bad rum, you realize something important. There's no turning back. You're no longer a boy from a dockside slum. You're a criminal, a drifter, a pirate. Your life is no longer your own. The sea owns you now. And while the stories you heard as a kid painted pirates as swaggering heroes, you're starting to see the cracks. The captain yells more often than he laughs. The crew fights each other over scraps of food. Someone disappears every few weeks. You've heard whispers of worse things, captains marooning crewmen over petty insults, ships being deliberately wrecked for insurance schemes, even cannibalism in the most desperate of storms. Historians still argue whether those stories were just propaganda or whether pirate life was truly that brutal. But lying there, under a torn sailcloth with bruised ribs and a head full of rum, you start to think it doesn't really matter, because you're living it now. And even if there's no treasure, no glory, no legends, this is your life. And it's only just begun. You wake up to the shrill cry of a gull stealing crumbs from someone's breakfast, and for a split second, you forget where you are. The sway of the ship lulls you, almost gently, until a bucket of seawater thrown across the deck splashes your legs and reminds you exactly what kind of mistake you've made. You're a pirate now, remember. Not the charming, eye-patched kind with a hook hand and a loyal parrot, but the unpaid laborer on a floating coffin where every rope, burn, and splintered toe feels like a personal insult. You used to think piracy was all adventure-ripping, open treasure chests, sword-fighting noblemen, maybe even a damsel or two. That was the story you were sold in those smoky taverns, when you had nothing better to believe. But now that you're here, peeling a moldy onion with a rusted knife, while a half-naked man vomits over the side of the ship beside you, you begin to suspect the romance of piracy was just a cruel prank played on desperate men like you. Your crewmates aren't daring rogues, they're starving, lice-infested half-mad sailors who've spent too long chasing legends written by people who never spent a single night at sea. Someone once told you that pirates lived outside the rules, free from kings and crowns and chains. It sounded thrilling, didn't it? But freedom turns out to be exhausting. Without rules, you just trade one kind of suffering for another. You used to follow the laws of land, you broke them, sure, but they were still there. Now, you follow nothing but the angry whims of your captain and the endlessly changing moods of the sea. Historians still argue whether pirates were anarchists with purpose or just disorganized criminals. From your perspective, it all looks the same when you're scrubbing vomit off a plank for the third time that day. There's something almost comical about how fast your illusions crumble. You used to imagine pirates swaggering down docks in fine coats with gold buttons and feathered hats. You even tried to make yourself look a little more like that once, by tying a red cloth around your head like a bandana. It blew off in the first strong breeze, landed in the cook's stew pot, and now everyone just calls you Soup Head. No one cares about style here. If your pants don't have holes in them, someone's probably going to steal them while you sleep. If your boots fit too well, they'll go missing. You learn fast to make yourself as uninteresting as possible, never too clean, never too confident, never too slow to move. When an officer barks your name, you find that every man on this ship has a story, but none of them are the kind you'd tell your children, even if you had any. One man was a butcher who killed his boss with a cleaver and ran. Another was sold to a ship captain to pay off his family's debt. There's a former nobleman who claims to have fled court after an affair with a duchess, but no one believes him. He smells too much like spoiled cheese and lies. There's even a boy younger than you who won't talk at all, just sits by the railing and hums tunelessly while sharpening a knife on his boot. You don't ask questions. You just nod and keep your eyes low. The stories you once found thrilling now sound like warnings. But the biggest joke of all, the punchline to this absurd life, is that there really is something addictive about the sea. Between the rot and the filth and the screaming, there are quiet moments that wrap around you like a warm fog. Early in the morning, when the sun peeks out from a bruised horizon, the light's soft and golden, and the ocean looks like a pool of melted coins. You almost believe it was worth it. Almost. Those fleeting glimpses of beauty trick your brain into thinking you're living some kind of grand adventure. But then someone throws a dead rat at you because it ran across their bunk, and you're jolted back to reality. You've become good at pretending, though. That's the first real skill you pick up. You pretend not to notice when someone steals from the communal food. You pretend you're not scared when another ship approaches on the horizon. You pretend you don't miss land, or beds, or mothers, or safety. One of the veterans tells you that the only real difference between a pirate and a soldier is who's paying. Pirates don't get paid. Not really. Oh sure, there's plunder if you survive the fight. If the treasure is real. If the captain doesn't keep the best parts for himself. That's a lot of ifs. Most of the time, you take whatever you can and trade it in port for grog, knives, or increasingly questionable tattoos. You once got paid with a crate of wigs. Real, powdered, courtly wigs. No one knew what to do with them, so a few were used to mop up leaks, and one was worn during a drunken game of who can imitate a governor best. It was the hardest you'd laughed in weeks, even though the winner got punched in the face by the actual governor's nephew the next day. Still, the dream lingers. The idea that maybe the next raid will be the one. The big haul. The treasure that sets you up for life. Historians still argue whether any pirate actually found a life-changing amount of gold. Sure, there are names like Blackbeard and Captain Kidd that get thrown around, but those were the exceptions, not the rule. Most pirates died, broke, beaten, or beheaded. But no one wants to hear that part of the story. You remember one day, a shipmate found a gold coin wedged between two planks in the captain's quarters. He was so excited he nearly cried, ran around the deck waving it in the air like a madman. That night, he disappeared, just vanished. No one ever admitted to anything, but you knew what happened. Gold has weight, and not just the kind that sinks to the bottom of the sea. But here's the strange part. Even after all this, after the lies, and the pain, and the boredom, and the fear you don't leave, you could try to escape at the next port. Plenty have, but those who run either get caught or vanish into the kind of life that makes this one look luxurious. So you stay, you tie knots, you swab decks, you ignore the rotting food and the festering wounds. You listen to the captain's endless rants about the glory days of piracy, even though you suspect they never existed. You sharpen your knife, even though it's never clean. You learn to climb the rigging without looking down. You learn to spit just right, so the wind carries it away instead of back into your own face. Quirky pirate superstition becomes a daily routine. You touch the mast every morning for luck. You never whistle on deck that's inviting a storm. One sailor swears by sleeping with one boot on to confuse the devil. Another wears a chicken bone around his neck. You think it's stupid, but you keep a shark tooth in your pocket anyway. Why not? The sea is a cruel mistress, and she respects tradition. You're not brave. You're not smart. You're not even particularly lucky, but you've made it this far, and as the sun sets, again, painting the sails with the blood-orange glow of another day survived, you realize something you never expected. You don't belong anywhere else anymore. You wake before the sun because the sound of rats chewing on a rope above your head jolts you upright, heart pounding. And for a moment you think the ship is under attack. But no, it's just another day aboard the creaking, groaning hulk you now call home, where sleep is a luxury and peace is a myth. You roll out of your hammock, if you can even call it. It's more like a wet sling that smells like every bad decision you've made since birth, and your feet slap against damp, uneven boards. Someone's vomited near the ladder again. You step over it like it's a piece of driftwood. There's no time for nausea or disgust anymore. The smell is so constant, so oppressive, you don't even register it unless something really foul hits the air like burning hair or dead. fish that have cooked too long under the tropical sun. Welcome aboard. This is the ship you thought would carry you to riches and glory. But really, it just carries you from one brand of misery to the next. It's not just the filth. It's not just the stink. It's the sense that the ship itself resents you. Every plank groans. Every nail threatens to pop loose. Every creak in the hull sounds like a warning. You've heard stories of ships that were cursed, that whispered to their crews in the night, or changed course by themselves. You don't believe in curses, but sometimes, when you're the only one on night watch and the moonlight hits the sails just right, you swear the shadows shift in ways they shouldn't. And still, this ship is all you've got. It's a floating prison, a coffin with sails, but it's also your only shelter in a world that has long since forgotten your name. You learn quickly that everything on board has a job, even the nails and the rats. And if you don't have one, you're worse than useless. So you're assigned tasks. Haul the anchor chain, which is somehow heavier than your soul. Scrub the deck until your knuckles bleed. No, not with a mop, with a block of sandstone that rubs both wood and flesh into a raw shine. Patch sails high in the rigging while the ship rolls under your feet, and the wind threatens to fling you into the ocean like a discarded rag. The rigging becomes both your friend and your greatest enemy. It's where you learn balance, muscle memory, fear, control. One slip, and it's a long drop to the deck, or worse, into the sea, where the crew won't even throw a rope unless they're in a generous mood. The sea doesn't give second chances. The captain sure doesn't. And your crewmates, they'll give you exactly as much help as you've earned, which, in your case, isn't much yet. The ship has no privacy, no corners to hide. You dress, sleep, eat, and relieve yourself within earshot and often eyeshot of everyone else. If someone snores, you all suffer. If someone coughs blood, you just turn over and try not to inhale too deeply. The food doesn't help. It's a horror show of creative suffering. Hardtack biscuits that break your teeth and sometimes have tiny white worms wriggling through the cracks. Salt pork, that's more salt than pork, and smells vaguely like damp rope. Sometimes there's dried peas, but usually they're boiled into a gray sludge that looks like prison gruel and tastes worse. On good days, there's fish. On bad days, there's moldy fish. And on terrible days, there's nothing at all. You learn not to complain. Complainers get less. Complainers get punished. You just chew, swallow, and hope it stays down. For drink, there's grogga, delightful mixture of stale water, cheap rum, and desperation. It's supposed to kill bacteria in the water, but mostly it kills your will to live. Drink too little, and you risk getting sick. Drink too much, and you fall out of the crow's nest during night watch. One man did that last week. They didn't even bother searching for him. Just crossed his name off the ledger and divvied up his belongings, which consisted of a half-dull knife and a pipe carved from driftwood. You claimed neither. You're not quite that far gone yet. The ship itself is a labyrinth of decay. The hold is dark and damp and smells like wet dog and despair. Barrels roll with each wave, tied down by ropes that look like they'll snap at any second. There's no such thing as clean. You start to recognize the different kinds of mildew by smell: black mildew, green mildew, the fuzzy white kind that grows on leather. Even your clothes have started to grow their own ecosystems. Your shirt stiffens into shape after a week without washing, and your socks could probably walk away on their own if you let them. Historians still argue Whether the average pirate ship was dirtier than a prison or just differently filthy, but from where you're sitting barefoot, exhausted, and covered in sweat, you think it's probably worse than both. There's a rat nest behind the food stores. You know it's there. Everyone knows. But no one does anything about it, because rats mean the food hasn't all rotted yet. The real danger is when the rats leave. That's when the ship is doomed. Sailors are a superstitious bunch, and pirate ships are breeding grounds for every weird belief you can imagine. Whistling brings storms. Bananas are bad luck. Never kill an albatross. Don't say the word drown. You roll your eyes at most of it, but still, you never whistle, just in case. There's one guy on board who swears he once saw a mermaid. Said she had barnacles on her face and eyes like dead oysters. Probably just heat stroke and bad rum, but he's been quiet ever since. Won't go near the railing. Sleeps with a hand-carved fishbone dagger under his pillow. You think Hayes crazy. You also think he might not be wrong. The ocean plays tricks on you. The longer you're out here, the more you start to see shapes in the mist, shadows on the waves. Sleep deprivation doesn't help. Neither does scurvy, which has started to show up again in a few of the crew. Bleeding gums, swollen legs, the occasional tooth just falling out into a bowl of soup. You try not to watch when someone's mouth opens to shout and you see a blackened crater where a tooth used to be. Historians still argue whether pirates truly feared scurvy or just accepted it like the weather. In your case, you've already started stashing orange peels when you find them in port, drying them into brittle curls you chew when no one's looking. They taste like hope and desperation. You find out that your ship has a name that sounds fearsome, the Devil's Grin. It's painted on the side in flaking red paint, though most of the letters have worn off. You think it's ironic. The ship hasn't grinned in years, but names matter, especially to outsiders. When other vessels spot you, they run. Not because they think you're rich or well-armed, but because they think you're insane. Pirates are feared not just for violence, but for unpredictability. You're not supposed to make sense. You're supposed to be wild, untethered, savage, and in a way, you are. A few more months of this, and you'll forget what sanity tastes like. You've already forgotten what silence sounds like. There's always something, a creak, a shout, the slap of water, the snap of sails. Even in the dead of night, the sea talks to you. Low groans from the hole, bubbles rising like breath, and sometimes, voices. Not real ones. Not exactly, but something. You blame the grog. You blame the wind. You blame whatever it takes to get through another night. But deep down, you start to believe that the ship is alive. Not in a fairy tale way. In the way a prison is alive. Always watching. Always hungry. The captain says nothing to you unless it's to yell. He has a face like weathered wood and a voice like gravel soaked in rum. He sleeps in a room slightly bigger than your hammock and owns a mirror he polishes more often than he shaves. He claims to have once stolen a Spanish galleon, single-handed. You doubt it. He can barely climb a ladder. But no one challenges him, because Hayes unpredictable and dangerous and owns the only key to the weapons chest. You do what you're told, even when it makes no sense. Because on this ship, orders are oxygen, and questioning them is suicide. It doesn't take long before your dreams start to taste like weevils, because at this point, even your sleep is seasoned with the same rot you chew on day after miserable day. You think about food more than you think about survival, which is saying something. Because most days it feels like your own body is actively trying to give up. You sit with the rest of the crew around a barrel that's been converted into a table, though the word table is generous, and you brace yourself as the cook. A man who looks like he was born from an onion and smells like something crawled inside him and died ladles out what might generously be called breakfast. It's a stew today, which is either good news or terrible news, depending on the source of the meat. You poke at it with your spooner, dented crooked piece of tin with a handle that threatens to snap. Every time you scoop hand, you find something gray and stringy that might once have been chicken or could just as easily be rat. You eat it anyway, because if you don't, someone else will. Hunger has a way of simplifying your morals. Food is a sacred thing on this ship, and also a joke. Most of it is hard-tacked flour and water turned into bricks that could break a tooth and often do. They're stored in barrels, sealed tight to keep out moisture, but nothing keeps out the weevils. You learn quickly to tap the biscuit on the table to knock the bugs out before you bite, and then you eat it fast, before anything crawls back in. The weevils are actually a source of protein, or so one of the older sailors claims. He says it with a wink and a smile that reveals more gaps than teeth. You laugh because it's either that or cry. There's salted pork too, but calling it pork is optimistic. It's fat and sinew and sometimes has hair still attached. It comes in barrels filled with brine that smells like low tide and old socks. And you always eat it cold, because no one wants to waste fuel lighting a fire, just to make food taste slightly less awful. On rare occasions, when you dock at a port, you might be lucky enough to steal or barter for something fresh fruit, maybe, or bread that hasn't been infested with mold. But those moments are rare and fleeting, and usually followed by a night of fighting in a tavern, or fleeing angry dock hands with clubs. Fresh food spoils quickly, and it always runs out faster than it should. The rest of the time, your meals are whatever the cook manages to scrape together. He once served soup made from crushed bones, seawater, and something that might have been seaweed or might have been a dead jellyfish. No one asked, no one cared. You just slurped it down and went back to work. Water is even more precious. Rainwater is collected in barrels and used sparingly, but it's never enough. The rest of your drinking water comes from casks filled back at port, and the longer you're at sea, the more the water takes on a slimy, greenish hue. You drink it anyway, usually mixed with rum, which isn't as fun as it sounds. The grog is weak and sour, a mixture of spirits and despair, and it leaves your tongue dry and your thoughts foggy. But it's safer than the water, and safer than thirst. Historians still argue whether pirates drank grog because they liked it or because they had no other choice. You already know the answer. The grog is the lesser evil. It's either that or cholera. The ship has no proper kitchen, no clean utensils, and no one who knows how to cook anything beyond burn it until the maggots fall off. The fire is small, tucked away in a corner of the lower deck, where it won't catch the sails or set the whole ship ablaze. Meals are cooked in a single blackened pot, over the same fire used to boil tar and light signal flares. You've seen roaches crawl across the pot more than once. No one bothers to clean it. The cook says the soot adds flavor. You think haze, probably not wrong. One time, someone caught a turtle, huge lumbering thing, dragged aboard in a net like a prize from Neptune himself. The crew cheered like they'd found buried treasure, and for once, there was something close to excitement in the air. The cook killed it with a cleaver, And everyone got a bite of meat that didn't taste like death. You haven't stopped dreaming about that turtle since. You remember the way the meat pulled apart in strings, juicy and tender, with just a hint of the sea, but none of the rot. You remember licking your fingers, not even caring that you hadn't washed in weeks. You remember feeling alive, and then it was gone. Back to biscuits and brine. Back to drinking soup that tastes like dirty coins. And yet, despite everything, food becomes the only constant. It marks time in a world where days blend together like waves on the horizon. Morning gruel, midday stew, evening biscuit if you're lucky. If you're not, it's just one meal and a handful of grog. The rest of the time, you fantasize about fruit, or cheese, or bread that isn't black around the edges. Some nights, you swear you can smell a bakery on the wind, but it's just your mind playing tricks again. The crew has its own way of dealing with the hunger. Some steal, some hoard, some trade favors for an extra ladle of stew or a corner of someone's salted biscuit. You don't judge them. You understand. Hunger makes you someone else. It takes the sharp edges of your personality and grinds them into a dull, desperate ache. One sailor swears by catching flying fish. He ties a line around his waist and leans over the bow with a net during dusk, trying to snag them as they leap from the water. He caught 2 in 3 months. They were gone in minutes, bones and all. Another guy tried to raise chickens in a crate, nailed to the aft deck. It worked until the birds went mad from the motion and pecked each other to death. The meat was tough and stringy, and the smell lingered for weeks. Still, better than biscuit. You once caught a crab clinging to the hull. You boiled it and ate it in secret, hiding behind the gunwale like a thief. Even though you could have shared it, you didn't. You savored every bite in silence and licked the shell clean. It's one of the few things you're ashamed of, but not enough to regret it. In the darkest corners of the hold, where barrels sweat and shadows stretch longer than they should, there's talk of cannibalism. No one says it outright, but the looks people give when food runs out, those lingering glances at the sick, the dying, the ones who don't scream when touched too, know what they mean. You pretend you don't notice. You pretend it's just the grog. But you know, everyone knows, it's the unspoken rule. Stay strong or become soup. There are no funerals here. When someone dies, they're sewn into their hammock and tossed overboard with a rock tied to their feet. If they were liked, someone might say a few words. If they weren't, it's silence and splash. The cook once joked that we should boil a man before he dies to save on firewood. He laughed. No one else did. The laugh stayed in the air, stale and thick. You didn't sleep well that night. Quirky tidbit. Someone once found a dead rat and roasted it on a spit like a game bird. He seasoned it with crushed hardtack and lemon peel, saved from a stolen officer's drink, called it rat au vin. The joke was tasteless. The rat was worse, but no one stopped him, because hunger rewrites the rules. And you keep your stash. A few biscuit crumbs in a pouch, a dried fish scale you pretend is lucky, a strip of jerky too tough to chew but comforting to suck on. You guard it like treasure, even though it wouldn't feed a dog. Because in this floating nightmare, food is the only thing that still means anything. Historians often debate whether pirates had better food than Navy ships, given their lack of discipline and frequent stops at unguarded ports. But from your daily encounters with spoiled meat and biscuit beetles, you're inclined to say no. Maybe once, long ago, Some well-fed privateers ate roast duck and fresh bread under the stars. But you're not them. You're just a starving soul on a rotting deck, chewing on hope and trying to remember what flavor is. You notice it first when your gums start to feel spongy like overripe fruit, and brushing your teeth on the rare occasion you manage it with a bit of salt or chewed wood makes them bleed in long lazy drips that taste like metal and rot. You tell yourself it's nothing, maybe a bit of bruising from that fight last week, or the fact that your diet consists almost entirely of weevils and regret. But then a molar loosens, just a little, enough to wiggle with your tongue like a baby tooth. You don't say anything, of course. You're not stupid. The last man who admitted to illness was left behind in a harbor in Hispaniola with a pouch of hardtack and no farewell. On this ship, weakness is a disease more contagious than scurvy. So you hide it. You clench your jaw when it aches. You swallow the blood when it pools. And you pretend the pain in your legs is just from climbing the rigging, not the telltale sign of a body screaming for citrus and sanity. The truth is, everyone's rotting slowly, some faster than others. There's a man on board named Red who hasn't seen his real skin tone in weeks. His legs are so swollen he can't wear boots, and the sores on his ankles attract flies even when the wind is strong. He coughs blood into his shirt and says nothing about it. He's been at sea too long to bother complaining. When you ask someone what's wrong with him, they just shrug and mutter, "Tropical curse." That's the catch-all term for everything out here fevers. Infections, parasites, toothaches, madness, tropical curse. But you know better. It's scurvy. It's malaria. It's every disease that festers in the lungs and blood of men, forced to share filthy quarters and survive on rotten food. The humidity alone breeds sickness like mold on bread. You wake up drenched in sweat, your clothes clinging like a second, soggy skin. The air doesn't move below deck. It just sits there, thick and wet, pressing on your chest until every breath feels like an effort. You itch constantly. Your skin is a patchwork of bites, rashes, boils, and sunburns. One man had lice so bad he shaved his entire body and still complained about crawling sensations at night. He started sleeping on the upper deck just to avoid the feeling, until one stormy night he was swept overboard and no one saw him again. You tell yourself that won't be you, but the truth is, it could be any of you. Disease doesn't care how careful you are. It doesn't care if you're brave or clever or strong. It just waits, quietly, patiently. It slips into cuts and gums and lungs and waits for you to fall asleep before tightening its grip. The doctor, if you can call him, that is actually the ship's carpenter. He has a rusted box of tools and a bottle of rum and a collection of bone saws that look older than the ship itself. He claims to know a thing or two about healing, but most of his treatments involve amputation, cauterization, or stuffing wounds with tobacco and hoping for the best. He once tried to leech a man's fever using a fish because he'd read somewhere that it draws out the poison. The fish died. The man did too. 2 days later. No one asked for a refund. Historians still argue whether pirate ships had dedicated surgeons or if the role was always improvised. But on your ship, medical care is just another form of suffering. You'd rather take your chances with a knife fight than with the doctor. At least with a blade, you might die quickly. But the worst part isn't the sickness itself, it's what it does to your mind. Fever dreams become a regular part of your nights when you can sleep at all. You see your old home, distorted and sinking. or your mother's face twisted in agony as she spits teeth like pebbles into a basin. You wake with your fists clenched, breath ragged, and the taste of blood in your mouth, unsure if it's dream or reality. One Manon, older sailor with gray in his beard and madness in his eyes, started talking to the sea. Not metaphorically. He'd kneel at the edge of the ship every dusk and whispered to the waves, asking them for mercy or forgiveness or company. You don't know. No one asked. Eventually, he jumped. No one tried to stop him. Another sailor went blind over a week, his eyes yellowing and leaking some foul-smelling liquid. He didn't scream, just sat in the corner of the hold, muttering about snakes and shadows. Then he stopped moving altogether. They wrapped him in a hammock and slid him into the sea before the smell got worse. Sometimes, the stink of decay is so overwhelming it clings to your skin long after you've left the room. You smell it in your hair, your clothes, your own hands. It mixes with sweat and salt and oil until everything reeks of sickness. There's no escape. You dream of rain just so you can stand in it and feel clean again. And yet, you survive. You chew the bark someone swears keeps fever away. You rub bruised fruit on your gums when you can steal it from port. You breathe through your mouth when passing the sick. You sleep with one eye open in case someone decides your body might be easier to loot when it's still warm. Every day, you perform small rituals of resistance against the slow rot. You scrape your tongue with a bit of bone. You soak your feet in salt water to stave off the blisters. You try to keep your hands clean, even if it means wiping them on already filthy cloth. You tie charms from broken rope and bits of bone and tell yourself they work. They don't. But you need to believe in something. Quirky tidbit. There's a rat on board who seems immune to everything. Fat, glossy, smarter than half the crew. No one tries to kill it. In fact, some feed it scraps. They call it Dr. Rat. Superstition, maybe, or just a weird kind of hope. You once saw the captain nod at it like it had offered medical advice. You didn't laugh. You didn't even blink. You just accepted it. Because honestly, Dr. Rat has a better track record than the ship's surgeon. And still, through all this, you keep going. Not because you're brave, not because you're strong, but because the only other option is to die, and you're just not ready for that yet. You tell yourself there's a port coming, a real one, with fresh food and cool water, and maybe even a doctor with real tools. You hold on to that dream like a lifeline, even as your body betrays you, one bruise at a time. Historians debate whether pirates were better off than Navy sailors in terms of health, given the relative freedom to dock and resupply. Maybe some were. Maybe there were ships with fresh oranges and daily baths, and men who didn't smell like fermented despair. But not yours. On your ship, health is just another fantasy, like treasure, or loyalty, or going home. You keep a rotten lemon peel tucked in your pocket. It's shriveled and hard and probably more dangerous than helpful at this point. But you smell it sometimes, just to remind yourself what citrus was. It helps a little. And when the night comes and the stars blur overhead like smeared candlelight, you lie in your hammock, body aching, teeth throbbing, eyes burning, and you tell yourself you'll feel better in the morning. It's a lie, but it gets you through the night. You wake up to shouting again, not the normal kind that comes with bad weather or spilled grog, but the sharp, panicked kind that slices straight through your sleep and drags you upright with your heart already racing. Someone's accusing someone else of theft, and that's a dangerous game on a pirate ship where justice doesn't wear wigs. wears boots, and carries a whip. You stay quiet, watching from your hammock, trying not to attract attention, because if the crew needs a scapegoat, they'll settle for whoever's nearby. Accusations fly like gulls. In a storm, he took more rum than he was owed. He kept silver buttons from that Spanish ship. He lied about his share of the sugar barrels. You hear it all and wonder if anyone actually cares about the truth, or if this is just a way to blow off steam. Pirates aren't known for emotional stability. The captain steps in finally, calm as ever, chewing a bit of something unidentifiable while he listens. His face is unreadable, but his eyes, those never blinked out between the men like a falcon weighing who to kill first. Then, just like that, he orders the accused to be tied to the mast. The sentence is 10 lashes, no trial, no second chances. You wince with each crack of the whip, not just from the sound, but from the way the man screams, the wet slap of rope against flesh, the blood that soaks into the wood. You've seen this before. Everyone has. And yet, it never stops being horrifying. It's supposed to be a deterrent, a reminder that freedom doesn't mean chaos. You signed up for piracy, thinking there were no rules. But oh, there are rules, so many rules. They call it the pirate code, and while every crew has its own version, they all share one brutal truth. Break the code, and you suffer. It's not romantic, not like the stories. It's survival, enforced with knots and knives. There's a clause for everything. How treasure is divided, how duels are handled, what happens if you lose your weapon in battle. If you fall asleep on watch, you lose your ration of grog for a week. Cheat your crewmates, and you're marooned. Kill a fellow pirate without cause, and you're hanged or worse. Historians still argue whether the pirate code was truly democratic or just another tool for control. But you've seen it used like scripture, quoted line for line, when it benefits whoever's in charge. Justice on board feels less like law and more like theater. You once saw two men argue over a pair of boots, leather cracked and full of holes. They couldn't settle it peacefully, so they drew lots, and the loser had to go barefoot for a week. When he complained later, he was accused of insubordination and given extra duty cleaning out the latrine buckets. Those are rules too, unspoken but ironclad. You don't whine. You don't challenge the chain of command unless you're ready to bleed for it. And if you really want change, you whisper, quietly, carefully. Because that's how mutinies are born, not in grand speeches, but in shared glances and late-night whispers over shared bread. You remember the first time you heard real talk of mutiny. The captain had been drunk for days, barely steering the ship, letting rations rot while he staggered around the deck, shouting nonsense. You thought maybe he was sick, maybe cursed, maybe already dead inside. But no one confronted him directly. Instead, the first mate started asking questions, soft ones about leadership, about fairness, about what might happen if someone else took the helm. Then came the murmurs about where the captain kept the gunpowder, who was loyal to whom, and which direction the nearest port was. It didn't happen in a day. It never does. Mutiny is slow poison, and once it's in the water, it spreads. That time, nothing came of it. The captain sobered up just enough, threatened just loudly enough, and reminded the crew that he still controlled the food and the weapons. But you felt the tension long after. And now, every time something goes wrong, when the ship lurches off course, when a raid goes badly, when rations run out to wonder if tonight's the night the whispers come back. The terrifying part is, sometimes you want them to. Because the captain isn't always right. He plays favorites, hoards rum, hands out punishments like candy. The men who kiss up to him get cushy jobs. The rest of you suffer. You've watched him flog a sailor just for falling asleep standing up. You've watched him gamble away crew shares at port. You've heard him lie through his teeth about how much treasure was actually taken from a raid. But still, you hesitate. Mutiny is final. If it fails, there are no second chances. And if it succeeds well, someone has to take charge. And what if they're worse? You remember a man named Holt who once led a mutiny on a different ship. Took control, promised equality, fair shares, even fresh fruit. Within a week, had executed 3 crewmates for suspicion of betrayal and declared himself Commodore. His ship disappeared a month later. No one knows what happened. Some say the Navy found them. Others say the crew turned on him. One tale claims he went mad and sailed into a hurricane on purpose. You believe all of it because power changes people. And on the sea, it changes them fast. One quirky little custom you've seen. During tense times, some pirates leave little offerings on the captain's door. Bits of coin, broken jewelry, dried herbs. Not for bribery, exactly, but as protection, like appeasing a storm. The captain never acknowledges them, but they keep appearing. Superstition or fear, who knows? You even did it once. Left a carved bone with your initials on it. The next day, the captain nodded at you during roll call, and you felt your knees go weak. Was it respect, recognition, or just random? You'll never know. Discipline isn't just about punishment. It's about fear. A good captain knows how to keep it simmering without letting it boil over. Your captain is ... adequate. Some are worse. You've heard tales of captains who'd kill a man just to prove they could. Others who'd lock up crew for weeks with no food, just to teach a lesson. One story says there was a captain who nailed a sailor's tongue to the mast for lying, not for stealing, not for mutiny, just lying. That one keeps you up at night. You once asked a veteran sailor if it was true. He just laughed and said, "Worse things have happened." That's not comforting. But the truth is, without some form of order, the ship would descend into madness. Pirates may be thieves, but they're organized thieves. You follow the code because the alternative is chaos. And chaos on a ship is fatal. If the rigging isn't maintained, you lose your sails. If watches aren't kept, you're sunk by surprise. If food isn't rationed, you starve. So you put up with the rules. You endure the beatings, the lashes, the unfair shares. You salute the captain even when you hate him, because the ship floats as long as the chain of command holds. Historians debate whether pirate crews were democratic or despotic whether. The image of voting captains in and out is romantic fantasy or real history. The answer, you think, is both. Some captains are voted in, some are taken by force. Some are inherited like diseases. But once they're in charge, getting rid of them is like trying to spit out your own teeth. Painful, bloody, often fatal. You dream of a better ship sometimes, one where the rules are fair, the punishments rare, the captain wise. Then you wake up to the creak of wood, the smell of sweat, and the faint sound of groaning from below deck. Reality is here. It has rules. You will follow them, or they'll follow you to your grave. You'd think being a pirate means no rules, no bosses, no boring laws, just you and the sea and the sound of stolen coins clinking in your pockets. But that fantasy doesn't last longer than your first week on board. Because very quickly, you realize that pirates live by rules so strict, so oddly detailed, they make Royal Naval discipline look like a vacation. They call it the Pirate Code. And despite what you may have heard, it's not just some loose guideline that everyone casually agrees on over a bottle of rum. No, it's enforced with the same seriousness as a sword to the throat. From the moment you sign on to the crew, your life is governed by clauses and codes, many of which feel like they were written by a particularly vengeful librarian. No fighting on deck. Lights out at sundown. Equal shares unless you're the cook, the carpenter, or someone who miraculously saved a captain's life once and now gets a double share for eternity. Lose your cutlass. That's a fine. Fall asleep on watch. That's grog privileges gone. Steal from the common fund. That's a slow death with an audience. One pirate ship you were briefly on had a rule that no one could sing after sunset unless they'd bathed that day. Why? Because the last guy who tried it had such a bad stench that it supposedly haunted the sails. These codes varied from ship to ship, captain to captain, sometimes even crew to crew. But break one, and you'll feel the punishment faster than a cannonball hits water. The so-called freedom of pirate life is a lie whispered by landlubbers who've never tried sleeping next to someone who hasn't washed in 3 weeks. Real pirate life is about structure, and ironically, a kind of twisted fairness. Treasure, for instance, isn't just scooped up and kept by whoever grabs it first. After a raid, all loot is counted, argued over, and divvied up according to a painfully complex share system. Captains often get 2 shares. Quartermasters get 1.5. Regular crew get 1. Some ships have special bonuses. 1 share and an extra coin for the first man to board an enemy vessel, or a half share for anyone who gets severely wounded. There was once a cook who had his hand blown off while stirring stew during a sudden cannon strike. The crew awarded him the shares for the trauma and 3 extra barrels of pickled onions, which he hated but accepted with tears in his eyes. Historians still argue whether this kind of pirate socialism was a sign of true democracy or just a tactic to keep angry, armed men from murdering each other mid-ocean. You suspect it's both. But what really cements the seriousness of these rules is how pirates enforce them. There's no court, no lawyer, no chance to explain that it was your first time smuggling rum in your boots and you didn't realize it counted as theft. The captain, or sometimes the quartermaster, if Hayes, the stricter type, becomes judge, jury, and frequently executioner. Punishments range from flogging and docking pay to marooning, literally dumping. You on a deserted island with a flask of water and a loaded pistol, the latter presumably so you can choose your ending. There are stories of men clawing messages into coconuts, tossing them into the sea in hopes someone would read their last words. Most were never found. Some pirates tried to appeal to fairness or plead their case, but that's dangerous too. You remember one poor fool named Callahan who tried to argue had only taken extra rations because he felt weak. The captain had him whipped until his appetite vanished entirely, as he so poetically put it afterward, and then assigned him double-deck swabbing duty for a month. The code is brutal, but what makes it fascinating? You can call anything about this life fascinating at this point in your exhaustion is how it pretends to be civil. Some ships hold votes on certain rules. You've seen ballots scrawled on parchment with greasy thumbs, men lining up to vote on whether a new punishment is fair, or if the cook should be allowed to use lard from a particular barrel. One time, The crew voted to rename the ship after a parrot who had bitten 3 people in a row and then spontaneously dropped dead during a thunderstorm. The new name was Feathered Doomed. The parrot's body was mummified and nailed to the helm for good luck. This kind of weird democracy creates an illusion of control. You feel involved. You get to speak up. But deep down, everyone knows the loudest voices usually belong to the men with the sharpest knives or the most friends. That's another unspoken code alliances matter. Step on the wrong toes, and you might find yourself accused of something you didn't do, punished with no proof, and watching the smirks of those who engineered your downfall. Loyalty on a pirate ship is a currency more valuable than silver. Then there are the odd rules, the ones no one talks about until someone accidentally breaks them, like the superstition against bringing bananas on board. You laughed the first time you heard it until the captain threatened to toss you overboard for even mentioning it during lunch. Bananas are said to bring bad luck, make fish disappear, and rot faster than you can blink. Another taboo, whistling. Some crews believe it summons storms. One night, you caught yourself humming, and the man next to you slapped your mouth shut so hard your teeth ached. "Want to drown us all," he hissed. You didn't hum again for weeks. And don't even get started on women on board. Some ships allow them, others ban them entirely, claiming they're unlucky or too distracting. One tale tells of a woman who disguised herself as a man for 5 years, became the ship's best gunner, and only revealed her identity during her final moments after being hit by cannon fire. The crew, stunned into silence, buried her with full honors, but many weren't so lucky. There's debate among scholars over how often women sailed as pirates, but you know for a fact it wasn't as rare as some claim. They were there quietly, dangerously, sometimes more feared than the men. The code didn't care who you were, as long as you followed it. And when you didn't, well, there was always the plank. Not a myth, by the way. You've seen it done. But more often than not, pirates preferred something slower, something memorable. A punishment that would stick with the rest of the crew, like the scent of rotting fish in the hold. One time, a man was caught lying about gold head found as punishment. He was forced to wear a rotting fish around his neck for 3 days. The stench was unbearable. By the end, he begged to be whipped instead. Another was made to clean the ship's latrine with a toothbrush, the captain's old one, no less. These creative punishments became stories that echoed from ship to ship, each one more absurd than the last, all in service of keeping the code alive. Over time, you begin to internalize these rules, like a second skin. You flinch when someone whistles. You pause before eating anything yellow. You know exactly how many lashes come with which offense. You can quote sections of the code better than you can remember your own birthday. It's survival. It's the only way to stay breathing out here. You whisper it to yourself sometimes, late at night, like a prayer. No striking another without cause. No stealing from mates. Lights out at dusk. Shares fair. Death unfair. Don't touch the bananas. Not exactly poetic, but you find comfort in it. Because while the code is harsh, it's also the only thing standing between you and chaos. Between you and the kind of madness that happens when 40 angry, armed men are trapped on a wooden coffin in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but salt water and desperation in their souls. So you live by the code. You fear it. You respect it. You hate it. And slowly, very slowly, it becomes part of you. carved into your bones deeper than any tattoo. You'll never be free of it, not even if you leave the sea, not even if you survive. Because once you've lived by pirate law, all other laws seem like child's play. You're not just a man anymore. You're a rule-bound, grog-drinking, treasure-counting, banana-fearing creature of habit, a pirate, and the code owns you, whether you like it or not. So you've survived the rules, the code, the punishments, the rot, and the stench. Congrats, sort of. Now, let's talk about what you're actually here for. Treasure, that glittering, golden fantasy that pulled you out of a moldy port in the first place. The coins, the gems, the crowns crusted in rubies, and chests that overflow like in storybooks. That's what got you on this god-forsaken ship. But here's the first big disappointment of pirate life. And brace yourself for this one. There is no treasure. Not really. Not in the way you've imagined it. Anyway, what you mostly end up fighting, bleeding, and occasionally losing limbs for. Crates of sugar, bags of spices, rolls of dyed fabric, casks of wine that might already be vinegar, chests of boots, and occasionally laundry. Yes, there's a real historical record of pirates capturing a merchant vessel and ending up with a cargo hold full of freshly laundered linen. You stood guard over it for 2 days while the quartermaster haggled about whether the smell of lavender was worth a double share. Historians still argue whether this counts as piracy or glorified dry cleaning, but you don't have time for debates when you're knee-deep in somebody else's underpants. This is the cruel joke of pirate life. Treasure, in most cases, is just boring goods. The real riches of the high seas were anything that could be traded or sold. Tobacco, cocoa, indigo, silk, the gold doubloons, rare, the gemstone necklaces, practically mythical. You do get coins sometimes, Spanish ones mostly, but often they're mixed in with all sorts of random currencies. Some so devalued they might as well be poker chips. You once got paid in copper buttons and a cracked monocle. The captain told you it was a symbolic reward. You symbolically almost threw it at his head. And when there is gold, real gold, it's almost never just lying around in perfect wooden chests. It's hidden, disguised, melted, sewn into clothing, or jammed into barrels under salted pork. You once watched a man nearly choke trying to swallow a gold ring during a raid. He didn't want to share it. You see, but he ended up passing it 3 days later and had to wash it thoroughly before pretending it was his grandmother's heirloom. You're still not sure if it was worth the effort, but let's say, just for fun, that you do find a real treasure chest. You open it. There's actual gold inside. The crew cheers. For a moment, you think maybe this life is finally paying off. Then the math starts. The shares are calculated. The captain takes his cut. The quartermaster takes his. The cook gets a half. The guy who lost his leg 3 raids ago gets a pity coin. There's a fight over whether that ruby is the size of a chicken egg or just a very large olive. By the time it's your turn, you get to coins and a nasty bruise from the argument. You spend 1 coin on grog and lose the other in a crack between the deck planks. You consider crying, but remember that pirates aren't supposed to cry. So you just stare at the horizon and stew in your own sweat. And let's not forget, treasure also brings risk. Ships with gold attract more naval patrols. They make you a bigger target for other pirates, and they weigh you down literally. One time your ship nearly sank because someone stashed too much silver in the bow and forgot to balance it out. The vessel tilted so badly, the rum barrels rolled into the sleeping quarters, and a very drunk parrot woke everyone up by shrieking, "We're all gonna die," repeatedly until the helmsman threw it overboard. It flew back 2 days later. You have no idea how. Now, sometimes, in very rare cases, a pirate crew does find real treasure, like the kind that legends are made of. Spanish galleons full of plunder from the New World. But getting to those ships is like winning a knife. Fight in a thunderstorm while blindfolded. They're heavily guarded, heavily armed, and their crews are desperate not to die. You once approached one, and before you even got within cannon range, they set their own ship on fire rather than let you take it. You floated for hours picking burnt sugar out of the water. So what you usually end up with is stolen commerce merchant goods heading from colonies to Europe, all meant to feed the insatiable demand for luxury. It's capitalism with cannonballs. You raid a vessel for barrels of molasses, which are sticky, heavy, and attract rats. One time, your boots got stuck in a puddle of it, and you had to be pulled out like some kind of sugar swamp creature. Another time, you captured a load of nutmeg and black pepper. The captain nearly wept with joy. Spices, he said, were better than coins. He ordered the cook to make something flavorful for once, and the resulting stew nearly set everyone's mouth on fire. You've learned more about herbs and seasonings than you ever cared to. You also occasionally seize textiles, bolts of silk from India, wool from England, calico from the East Indies. You try not to touch it. It's delicate, expensive, and tends to smell weird when mixed with sea salt and fish guts. One cargo was nothing but lace and perfume, and for 2 weeks afterward, the ship reeked like a brothel. Another time, it was indigo dye, which leaked and turned half the crew purple. You walked into a port looking like a band of bruised blueberries and got laughed at by a group of children. The humiliation still lingers. And then, of course, there's the awkward matter of human cargo. Some pirate crews, especially those in the Caribbean, intercept slave ships. Sometimes they free the enslaved people. Sometimes they force them into service. Sometimes they sell them again. You've been on a ship where a heated argument broke out over whether the captured men should be freed, and it ended with the captain marooning 2 of his own crew for softness. Historians still argue whether pirates were more egalitarian than other seafarers, or just opportunistic criminals with better press. You don't pretend to know the answer. You just know that the line between savior and slaver can get thin when the loot is breathing. One of the strangest raids you remember was when you boarded a vessel that turned out to be empty of anything useful except for an extravagant collection of wigs. Powdered, perfumed, some 3 feet high, all delicately arranged on head mannequins. The captain decided they were worth something and made everyone wear one as a joke. For 2 whole days, the crew looked like a floating royal cortege, ridiculous and enraged. The wigs were tossed overboard after a lice outbreak. You never laughed harder, except when the captain discovered he liked his and wore it for the next month. Pirate treasure, it turns out, is mostly a trick of perception. You came here for gold, but stayed for rum, fleas, and fabric. And when you finally get to land and try to sell your share, whatever it is, you realize it's not always easy to offload barrels of cinnamon or crates of moldy oranges. The local merchants either lowball you or accuse you of theft. One even tried to get the authorities involved, and you had to flee a port town wearing a stolen priest's robes and a hat made from a chicken basket. not your finest hour. The idea of buried treasure is also mostly fiction. Pirates rarely buried their loot. It's not practical. Hiding gold in the ground and drawing a map with a big X is a good way to lose everything to the first storm, animal, or nosy goat. You heard about one crew that buried their silver near a palm tree and came back to find the coastline had shifted and the tree was now underwater. They spent a week diving with makeshift buckets and nearly drowned in the process. Maps do exist, but they're usually just coded notes, vague scribbles, or drunken ramblings. You found one once in a bottle. It said, 2 steps past the angry crab, left at the cursed coconut. You're still trying to figure out what that means. So why do you stay if there's no real treasure? Maybe it's the hope. Maybe it's the one story you heard of Black Sam Bellamy capturing the Witta galley and becoming the richest pirate ever for a few months before he died in a shipwreck. Maybe it's the legend of some lost hoard buried in Madagascar, or that cursed Spanish gold off the Florida coast. Maybe it's just the illusion that next time, next ship, next raid, the real prize will be yours. Or maybe, deep down, you just don't know how to live any other way now. You're a pirate, not a merchant. You steal things. You hoard nonsense. You chase shiny dreams and get paid in buttons and bananas. But somewhere in the back of your barnacle-crusted mind, you still believe in treasure. And that belief, however stupid, however unlikely, is what keeps you climbing back aboard, again and again, ready to raid another laundry boat. You'd think that after months at sea, half-starved, sunburnt, and covered in a thick layer of grime that smells like wet rope and bad decisions, you might struggle to come across as fearsome. But no, that's where you're wrong. Pirates are terrifying, or at least you're supposed to be. That's the image, isn't it? The reason merchant ships surrender sometimes without even firing a shot, it's not because they think you're charming. It's because you've cultivated a reputation so foul, so violent, so unhinged, that even the idea of facing you makes sailors turn their ships around and head for the nearest naval base. You might be wheezing through scurvy gums and walking like your joints are made of rusted chains. But with the right outfit and a few creative threats, you're a legend on the high seas. The truth is, much of piracy is psychological warfare. You build an image, an aesthetic, and it has to be consistent. That's why you and every crew member put effort into looking absolutely unhinged. Tattered coats with mysterious stains, some blood, some wine, some possibly goat-related, wide-brimmed hats decorated with feathers or bones, and enough weaponry strapped to your chest to make walking a full-body workout. Eye patches, sure. Hooks for hands, if you're unlucky. Tattoos, absolutely. The more ominous and bizarre, the better. You once knew a guy who tattooed the words "kiss of death" across his knuckles, but he misspelled death, and people started calling him Captain Death, which sort of backfired, but he rode with it. That's commitment. And don't forget your teeth, those rotten, yellowed fangs that look like they've been used to gnaw through anchor rope. Pirates don't have great dental hygiene, which means your grin alone is a weapon. You smile at someone, and they start praying. You open your mouth mid-threat, and a molar falls out. It's not glamorous, but it works. You also scream a lot. Yelling at people is part of the job, especially when you're boarding a ship. You swing over on a rope, land in a heap because you slipped, but immediately jump up and scream like a maniac with a dagger in each hand. That's how you make an entrance. Your voice has to carry over cannon fire, over waves, over the sound of people begging. You develop a pirate voice without even trying. Raspy, low, threatening. Some say Blackbeard used to tie slow-burning fuses into his beard and light them before a battle, so his face would be wreathed in smoke as he charged in. Historians still argue whether he did it for intimidation or just for the aesthetic, but either way, it worked. People thought he was possessed. You once tried something similar with a burning rope, and it set your sleeve on fire. Never again. Your gear is another story. You don't just carry one weapon. You carry several. Pistols, though, they're unreliable and slow to reload, are often tucked into your belt in multiples. Knives in your boots. A cutlass by your side. Some even carry granados, small bombs you light and toss, but you've seen more pirates blow off their own hands than actually hit a target. Still, they make you look dangerous, which is half the goal. The idea is to look like you have nothing to lose, because that's the scariest kind of person to face. The one whole fight, dirty, reckless, and without hesitation. You're the type who'd bite someone's ear off in a scuffle, just because you could. That's the image, and it's worked. The myth of the pirate is bigger than any one ship, any one crew. It spreads. One terrified merchant talks to another, and suddenly there's a whole fleet afraid of a single name. Like Calico Jack. Not exactly a successful pirate, but he had style, wore brightly colored clothes, hence Calico, and had Anne, Bonnie, and Mary Read, two legendary women, pirates in his crew. He got caught, of course, like most do, but his image lingered. Or Charles Vane, whose cruelty was so notorious that he got kicked out of his own pirate colony for being too awful. That's saying something. Then there's your own name. You might go by something dramatic. Black Gale, Iron Tom, Red Widow, or maybe something ridiculous like Porktooth Pete, which started as a joke but stuck when you accidentally won a duel. Your name becomes currency. You carve it into dock posts. You scrawl it on sails. You scream it when you attack. You want people to know you're coming. But here's the awkward part. Sometimes your reputation gets ahead of reality. You might be barely surviving on a leaky sloop with a crew of underfed misfits, and someone on the next ship thinks you're the ghost of Edward Teach. That's useful, sure, but also dangerous. Because then people start talking about you like you're immortal, and when you inevitably screw up like missing a boarding rope and falling into the water, mid-raid, that illusion crumbles fast. You once tried to bluff your way through a standoff by claiming you had cursed coins and could summon storms. The other captain laughed and fired a cannonball straight through your figurehead. Bluff over, so you double down. You make your flag scarier. Most pirate flags are black with white symbol skulls, bones, hourglasses, bleeding hearts. Yours might have all of those. The goal is to signal death is coming. Red flags, rarer but real, meant no quarter, no mercy. You once raised one accidentally and scared even your own crew. Had to take it down before they mutinied. The power of symbols is real. One flag can make a merchant crew surrender without a fight. That's efficiency. That's fear. That's reputation. But there's a cost to it. You can't let up. If you get soft, even for a second, word spreads. Other pirates test you. Navy ships chase you harder. Port cities deny you entry. The legend that protects you can also strangle you. You remember one pirate who got a reputation for being merciful, letting crews go, not killing prisoners, and it made him a target. People thought he was weak. He was captured within a year. hung in Kingston, while a crowd jeered and children threw rotten fruit. That image haunts you, so you maintain the fear. You exaggerate your own exploits. You tell stories in every port. Let rumors fly. You say you sunk a warship with your bare hands, that you slit a man's throat for sneezing near your rum, that you once sailed through a hurricane without blinking. Most of it is nonsense, but nobody dares contradict you. And the weirdest part, eventually, you start believing some of it. You get drunk and tell tales of your own bravery that never happened. The line between myth and memory blurs. One time, a kid in a tavern asked for your autograph, claimed to have heard of you from his uncle in Europe. You didn't even know you had fans. That night, you started calling yourself the Dagger of the Deep. No one questioned it. There's also the theater of death. Executions. You've seen pirates strung up in gibbets metal, cages left to rot as warnings. But even in death, reputation matters. Some pirates deliver epic last words. Some joke as the noose tightens. One supposedly said, "Dancing on air is better than crawling on land." Historians debate whether that's poetic license or actual bravado, but you believe it. You hope you'd be that cool. Deep down, every pirate wants to be remembered. Maybe that's why you collect scars like medals. Why you never let anyone forget your name. You want songs, stories, someone, someday, whispering your legend as they fall asleep. You know the irony. You're terrifying to live with, but oddly comforting in folklore. Parents say, behave, or the pirate gets you. But then they buy their kids eye patches and toy swords. Somewhere between nightmare and plaything, you've become cultural wallpaper. That might be your truest legacy. You never found real treasure, not the gold and jewels kind, but you found immortality in bedtime stories, campfire tales, and Halloween costumes. And that's got to count for something. Even if you're just remembered as the lunatic with 3 pistols, a peg leg, and a habit of humming sea shanties off-key, you still mattered. You still scared someone enough to make history blink. You still flew a flag that made men drop to their knees. And as the wind howls and your sails creak like old bones, you grin your rotten grin and know this: your reputation, for better or worse, will outlive you. You're not just a pirate, you're a legend. And legends, even the smelly ones, never die. You finally reach land after what feels like months of bobbing on open water. Your legs uncertain, knees shaky, the world tilting in directions that no longer make sense. And yet somehow this is supposed to be a break, your reward, your glorious return to civilization. Though calling it civilization is being generous. Port life, for pirates, isn't relaxation. It's a chaotic, pungent, disease-riddled mess that smells of burnt rum, rotting produce, and the kind of regret that settles deep into your boots. You step off the gangplank like some half-feral creature barefoot. If you lost your shoes in a dice game limping, if the last battle didn't go your way, your shirt stiff with salt and stained with substances you no longer bothered to identify. The port itself is a carnival of filth and noise, filled with people yelling in every language, known to man, and a few that probably aren't offering everything from handmade trinkets to questionable meat skewers cooked on open flames next to open sewers. There are sailors shouting for dockhands, vendors hawking oysters and pig's feet, toothless women waving handkerchiefs from upper windows, and somewhere a one-eyed man is playing a fiddle with only 2 strings. You blend right in, and that's the point. This is Tortuga, or Port Royal, or Nassau, or one of a dozen other havens where pirates like you pretend to be kings. For a day, blowing stolen silver on rum, cheap tattoos, and decisions that haunt you at sea. The first thing you do is find the rum shack, because of course you do. It's not even about the taste, it never is, it's the ritual. You slam your coin down, nod to the barkeep, and he hands you something brown, sticky, and potent enough to turn your memories into soup. You drink to forget, then drink to remember, then forget again. Time turns to mush. 1 minute, it's early afternoon. The next, you're dancing with a dog and singing sea shanties with strangers who claim to know your cousin from Barbados. Someone draws a crude anchor on your arm with a burnt stick. Another person challenges you to arm wrestling, but instead of arms, you use wooden spoons. You win. Somehow, there's always music drums, flutes, tin whistles, and pirates singing about women they never met and gold they never found. You join in, off-key but enthusiastic, because in that moment, you're not a sea-worn huskewer, a legend in the flesh, the hero of your own disaster. At some point, you end up in a back alley behind the brothel knot for reasons you remember. But because you've passed out next to a goat wearing someone's hat. When you wake, your mouth tastes like cannon smoke, your head is pounding, and someone has drawn a mustache on your face with charcoal. Standard. But you're alive. That's the main thing. You check your pockets. Your money's gone, but your pistol's still there. Priorities, of course. Not all port stories are ridiculous. Some are just bleak. You've seen friends disappear into gambling dens and never come out. You've watched crewmates try to spend their loot on love, handing over all their coins to someone who smiles sweetly and vanishes the moment their back is turned. There are stories of pirates buying entire pigs just to roast them, and others who paid bards to follow them around and narrate their day like some drunk Homeric epic. Historians still argue whether any pirate truly lived like that, but you've seen enough stupidity to believe almost anything. You might get a tattoo, because why not? Something bold and ridiculous. An anchor, a serpent, a ship with skull-shaped sails applied with a filthy needle, and ink that probably includes soot and rum. You wince through the pain, then admire it like a battle wound, telling everyone it has a secret meaning, even if it doesn't. One guy got no regrets tattooed across his chest. That was his only regret. The thing is, port life isn't just about pleasure. It's a necessity. You need supplies. You need fresh water, food that isn't crawling, wood for repairs, and powder for cannons. So while half the crew is busy drunkenly proposing to barmaids or brawling in back rooms over card games, the quartermaster is haggling with merchants who know exactly how desperate you are. Prices are triple what they should be. You pay anyway. You steal what you can't. And sometimes you barter stolen cargo for other stolen cargo, like some bizarre pirate economy where everyone's just robbing each other in a circle. You also fix the ship, which means dragging tar-covered ropes and splintered planks through docks that are already too crowded. You curse, sweat, and nearly fall into the harbor more than once. You get sunburned again, even though you were already sunburned before. You buy lemons because someone finally figured out that they help with scurvy, though your captain insists it's witchcraft. You buy chickens that look like they're already halfway dead and hope they lay eggs before becoming stew. Then there are the creatures. Pet monkeys are surprisingly common. You might have one yourself, spiteful little beast with matted fur and an eye twitch that's seen things. Pirates adopt parrots, cats, sometimes even snakes. One guy brought a raccoon on board, swore it could pick locks. It couldn't. Still, the animals become part of the legend. They sit on your shoulder, shriek at the wrong moments, and occasionally poop on the maps. You accept it, they're family now. But while you're enjoying your few days of land-based chaos, the world turns against you. Navies patrol these waters, bounties rise, word spreads that the governor of somewhere is paying top coin for pirate heads, preferably attached, but not necessarily. You notice strangers watching you. A man in a clean coat, too clean for this part of town. You hear rumors of informants, of trap ships disguised as merchants. You suddenly feel exposed. So, you lay low. You find the darkest tavern with the loudest patrons and blend in. You use a fake name, like Barnacle Joe or Captain Swill. You tip poorly and listen more than you speak. Eventually, your instincts scream enough. It's time to go. You gather your crew, now down a few members, some left for love. Some got stabbed. Some are just sleeping off a 2-day drinking session in a pigsty. You get your supplies loaded. The monkey bites someone. You hoist the anchor with a hangover the size of Panama and push off into the blue again. And as the port fades behind you, you feel a strange mix of relief and sadness. You hated it, but you'll miss it. Just a little. The chaos, the flavor, the noise. The brief illusion of being something other than a drifting outlaw. One last glance at the dock, and you swear you see the goat again. Still wearing that hat, you nod in respect. Now, the sea welcomes you back with open arms and the taste of salt. The wind finds your sails. The monkey finds your rum. Everything is back to normal. You return to your miserable, glorious, salt-soaked life, where land is but a brief fever dream, and the only direction is forward, toward the next disaster, the next raid, the next raid, the next blurred memory. But you'll carry the marks ink on skin, scars on knuckles, the vague memory of singing with someone named Toothless Eliza. You are a pirate, and pirates don't vacation, they survive in style. You find yourself staring at the horizon again, that endless stretch of sea and sky blurring into one another like a watercolor left out in the rain. And you wonder, just briefly, if the ocean ever gets tired of watching your kind crawl across its back like fleas on a dog greedy, stubborn, constantly squabbling over who gets to bite next. The breeze is calm today, not a whisper of a storm, not a sign of land, just blue above and blue below. And you realize with an odd, creeping awareness that these are the most dangerous days. The deceptively quiet ones, when nothing seems to happen, and yet your mind begins to unravel, thread by thread. This is the part of piracy. No one sings songs about the long, slow stretches between raids and ports, where time seems to stretch like old rope and the hours lose their shape. You wake, eat, work, sleep, repeat, over and over, until you forget how many days it's been since the last landfall, or since you last saw a face that wasn't sunburned, salt-crusted, and hungry. The sails flap above you like lazy ghosts. The wood beneath your feet creaks and groans with every swell. The crew has gone quiet, each man lost in his own thoughts, or perhaps trying not to think at all. The jokes grow fewer. The songs die off. Someone carves a tally into the mast for each day gone by. You've seen it before, the slow spiral of restlessness that creeps over the ship like mold. souring everything. You can feel it now, settling in your bones, whispering that maybe this time there won't be a prize at the end of it. Maybe this time the ocean will just swallow you all whole. It doesn't help that the food's running low. The last of the salted pork went green 2 days ago, and now it's mostly hardtack and dried beans, both of which seem designed less for nourishment and more for dental punishment. You break a tooth on a biscuit and laugh about it later, not because it's funny, but because you don't have the energy to be angry anymore. You've tried catching fish, but even they seem to be avoiding your shadow now. The water barrels are half full, and everyone pretends not to notice. You spot a rat gnawing through a sack of flour and briefly consider whether a roasted rat would taste better than boiled beans. Probably. The worst part is, the boredom it settles over you like fog, thick and cloying, sapping your will to move or think. You play cards with the same 4 people, all of whom cheat in increasingly obvious ways. You try whittling something, only to end up carving angry lines into the wood instead. You attempt to write a letter to someone, anyone, but realize you've forgotten how to begin, dear. You don't even know where it would go if you finished it, so you toss it. You eavesdrop on conversations, though they all blur together. Stories of old raids, old ships, old flames told and retold until even the storytellers look bored of their own memories. One sailor starts telling fortunes using bits of shell and broken glass. Another swears he saw a sea serpent off the port side 2 nights ago. He draws it on the deck in charcoal, complete with wings and a crown. Historians still argue whether pirates truly believed in sea monsters or if it was just something to break the monotony. But when the days stretch this long, even the skeptics start squinting at the water, half hoping for a glimpse of something impossible. You've seen stranger things, after all, like that time a bottle floated up to the ship with a message inside, just one word scrawled in ink: run. No one ever figured out where it came from. No ship nearby, no wreckage, nothing. You kept the bottle for weeks, wondering if it was meant for you. Or the time the sky turned orange for a whole afternoon and birds flew backward overhead. The old cook said it was an omen. Of what, he wouldn't say. Sometimes you think the sea is alive, not in the poetic way, but literally, as if it watches and tests you, tossing puzzles into your path just to see what you'll do. You once heard a tale from a sailor about a ghost ship that only appears when the moon is blood red, crewed by men with no faces. You laughed at the time. You don't laugh now. Not with the way the wind has been shifting lately, circling like a predator. Then someone goes missing. Not from battle, not from illness, just gone. One moment he was patching sails, the next his hammock is empty, and no one remembers seeing him after dinner. You search the ship from bow to stern, calling his name, checking the rigging, the barrels, even the bilge. Nothing, no blood, no signs of a fight, just vanished. A few of the men start whispering about curses. Someone blames the captain's old coiner, strange gold piece he keeps in a pouch and rubs between his fingers whenever the ship gets quiet like this. They say it came from a sunken temple off the coast of Hispaniola, and that ever since he found it, bad luck has clung to the ship like barnacles. You don't believe in curses until you do, because the next day, the compass stops working. Then the stars vanish behind a sky so thick with clouds, you wonder if they've been swallowed whole. The ship drifts, rudderless, leaderless, hopeless. The crew grows paranoid. Every whisper sounds like a plot. Every glance feels like a challenge. Fights break out over nothing. Over who gets the last dried fig. Over whose turn it is to scrape the barnacles. Over a joke someone told 3 days ago that wasn't even funny. You stay out of it, mostly. But when someone tries to accuse you of hoarding salt, you draw your knife without thinking. That's what the sea does. It strips away the layers until only the sharp parts remain. Eventually, the captain calls everyone to deck. His voice is strained, thinner than usual, like something's been unraveling inside him too. He tells you all that Hayes had enough of this aimless floating. Hayes plotted a course to an unmarked island he once heard about from a dying man in Havana. Says there's treasure buried there, enough to fill every pocket, enough to buy your way out of this life. No one questions it. You need something to believe in. And treasure is the only religion you all still follow. So you turn the ship, adjust the sails, and hope the island is real. The mood shifts almost immediately. Having a goal event, a foolish, imaginary one, is better than drifting. The wind seems to agree, picking up just slightly. The water clears. Even the rats seem more optimistic. You gather at night to hear the captain tell the story again of the island, shaped like a skull, hidden by reefs, protected by spirits. He claims he has a map burned into memory. He claims it was given to him by a priest with no tongue. He says the treasure is cursed, but the kind of curse that only kills cowards. You believe it because you want to. Historians debate whether pirates actually buried treasure, or if that was just a literary invention. But right now, you don't care. You need something to chase, something more than beans and boredom. The crew rallies. Repairs are finished. Duties are taken seriously for once. You even catch yourself humming again. The idea of land, of gold, of escape, it's intoxicating. You dream of it at night. Chests overflowing, soft beds, fruit that isn't dried, water that doesn't taste like algae, a new life, a clean start, maybe even a name you don't have to lie about. And in those dreams, you're someone else, someone who walks upright, who smiles easily, whose hands don't shake. But when you wake, your fingers still ache, and the salt still crusts your lips, and the island is still days away, or so the captain says. You don't question it. You just keep sailing, chasing a dot on a map that may not exist, because what else is there to do? The sea doesn't care. It will hold your ship like a cradle until you find land, or until you don't. You wake up with a start as the bell tolls faintly in the distance. Though it's hard to tell whether it's real or just your mind playing tricks again, echoing some fragment of a dream that disappeared the moment your eyes open. And as your senses return to you, slowly, like a tide rolling back in, you begin to remember where you are curled up in a hammock that smells of old sweat and mildew, swaying gently beneath the deck of a ship that creaks and groans like it resents carrying your weight. Your back stiff and your stomach knotted from too much grog and not enough hope. And today, much like every day lately, begins with the same creeping thought: you're still under the command of the worst captain imaginable. Not bad in the amusing, eccentric way you sometimes hear about, like the old pirate who kept parrots for counsel and made every man aboard memorize sea shanties in Ravasno. This one's the kind of bad that could get you killed, not just through cruelty, but through sheer incompetence. A man whose decisions lurch from rash to ridiculous, with no logic in between, whose navigation is as trustworthy as a drunkard's oath, and whose idea of strategy is more guesswork than planning. more dice roll than and yet, here you are, stuck under his command. And you remind yourself again that life at sea doesn't always hand you a choice, especially when the alternative is starving on land or swinging from a noose. And so you suck it up, tie your sash tighter, and prepare yourself for another long day. Under the rule of a man who once tried to barter an anchor for a pig, because he thought it might bring good luck. You remember that moment vividly, not just because it was absurd, but because it resulted in a day's delay, a missed opportunity to raid a merchant ship that was later picked clean by a rival crew, and the resulting fury on board nearly ignited a mutiny, though it fizzled out eventually when the captain, in his infinite genius, promised each man a share of treasure that may or may not even exist, hidden, supposedly, on a sandbar that appears only under a blood moon, according to the last madman he met in Nassau. You didn't believe it then, and you don't believe it now. But it worked temporarily, and so the ship limped forward under the weight of promises. No one really believed, but everyone was too tired to challenge. Historians still argue whether pirate captains were true democrats of the sea or just tyrants with fancy titles. But from where you're standing, it's clear that power and paranoia often shared a cabin. Your captain, for example, keeps a pistol loaded at all times, not for battle, but for his own men. And you've heard the whispers how he sleeps with one eye open, how he believes someone is always planning to take his place, how he once had a man flogged simply for standing too close to the map room. He claims to have fought in a dozen sea battles, but no one has ever seen the scars. And his swordplay is more theatrical than practical, one dramatic flourish away from poking his own eye out. You suspect he wears the captain's coat more for the illusion of authority than any earned command, and yet, as absurd as he is, no one has yet succeeded in dethroning him, partly because no one trusts anyone else enough to conspire, and partly because, in the twisted logic of pirate life, his madness is somehow preferable to the chaos that would surely follow a successful coup. You know what happened the last time someone tried to take the wheel? It ended with 3 dead, 1 man lost overboard, and a week without proper leadership, during which the ship drifted aimlessly and nearly collided with rocks off Tortuga. After that, most decided that madness with the direction was better than anarchy with none. And so the captain remained, presiding over his floating asylum with the confidence of a man who's either blessed or cursed, and no one can tell the difference anymore. He talks to himself more often these days, muttering to the figurehead as though it whispers back. And you've caught him once or twice feeding bits of dried fruit to the mast, claiming it wards off splinters. And yet, here you are, still taking orders from him, still hauling ropes, and swabbing decks while he charts imaginary courses and speaks of alliances with merfolk and spirits of the wind. There was a time when you'd have laughter, cried, but now, like the rest of the crew, you simply nod and pretend to listen, hoping that whatever insanity Hayes fixated on this week won't get you all killed. You recall the week he declared the sea itself an enemy and forbade anyone from touching the water, including for washing or fishing, which led to an outbreak of lice and a near mutiny, quelled only by the ship's cook bribing him with a cup of spiced rum laced with something special that put him to sleep for 16 straight hours. That was the calmest day you'd had in weeks. Quirky captains make for good stories, but you know now how dangerous they are when real lives hang in the balance. And though you often daydream about what it'd be like to serve under a proper leader, Someone who actually understands tides, who knows how to read the stars without squinting, who doesn't threaten to execute anyone who questions the spirits guiding his compass. You also know that wishing doesn't change the reality of your splintering ship or the thinning patience of its crew. One sailor, Jenkins, once kept a journal tracking every poor decision the captain made, from grounding the ship on a sandbar because he thought he saw a message in the waves, to forcing the crew to row in circles for hours to confuse any ghosts that might be trailing us. The journal mysteriously disappeared, of course, and Jenkins was reassigned to Bill's duty indefinitely. Another time, the captain swore a small cloud formation looked like a sign from his dead mother, and ordered the ship to follow it for 2 days, which ended with a cracked mast, a soaked hold, and a furious crew who could barely hide their contempt. You sometimes wonder how many pirate captains were just charismatic lunatics clinging to power through superstition and showmanship, and how many men died because no one dared say enough. You tried once politely, cautiously, to suggest a better route when navigating a tricky channel, only to be publicly shamed and accused of harboring landlubber thoughts. He gave you latrine duty for 3 days and ordered the navigator to throw your charts overboard. Ever since, you've kept your ideas to yourself, watching the ship inch closer to ruin, wishing you had the courage or the allies to change its course. The real tragedy, you realize, isn't that the captain is mad at it, that you've all adjusted to it, adapted around it, normalized it, until the absurd becomes routine and the dangerous becomes ordinary. You've stopped expecting leadership. Now you just hope for survival. Sometimes you dream of other ships, other captains, crews who sing because they want to, not because they're ordered to, where discipline doesn't mean random beatings or rants about invisible saboteurs. You even heard once of a pirate crew who elected a captain every month, and if he didn't deliver results, they tossed him overboard and tried again. That sounds like paradise compared to this. But dreams are dangerous, especially on a ship like this. You've seen what happens to those who dare hope for better. They get punished, mocked, or worse, disappeared. The captain's paranoia ensures no one rises too far, and even those he favors are eventually cast aside once he decides they've become too clever or too lucky. Leadership, under his rule, is a game of survival, not merit. And yet, he survives, somehow. Maybe Hayes lucky. Maybe the sea itself finds him amusing. Or maybe, in some twisted way, he represents what piracy has become, not a noble rebellion against tyranny, but just another form of it, wrapped in salt and rum and the illusion of freedom. Historians still argue whether piracy was a utopia of liberty or just a floating version of the same old power structures. And standing here, under this sky, under this captain, you know where you stand on that debate. The ship may fly a black flag, but it's ruled with the same clenched fist as any kingdom. And so day after day, you sail on under the worst captain imaginable, hoping he doesn't get you killed, knowing he probably will, and wondering if, perhaps, the real curse of piracy isn't the sea or the law or even the violence. It's the fact that you keep choosing it anyway because the alternative feels even worse. You wake to the sound of thunder, but it's not the weather, at least not the kind you can predict with clouds and barometer sits. The kind of thunder that comes from below deck, where the cannons are loaded by half-sober men with trembling hands, and the sharp smell of black powder fills the air so thickly you can practically chew it. And the pit in your stomach tells you that this time, it's not another drunken drill or the captain firing warning shots at phantoms again. No, this time the danger is real and creeping closer with every heartbeat. And as you lurch out of your hammock and fumble for your boots, you already know it's going to be one of those days, the kind where everything goes wrong before you've even tasted stale biscuits or weak grog, where the sea seems to rise against you and fate laughs as your ship lurches into chaos. And it all starts when a lookout spots a merchant vessel drifting far too comfortably for comfort. Sails full and wide, unaware or uninterested in the black flag your captain hoists too early. As always, turning what could have been a clean ambush into a full frontal mess, and you're rushing to stations with the rest of the crew, slipping on slick boards and ducking swinging ropes as the captain, drunk on either rum or delusion, bellows orders that contradict each other so quickly it's like watching two rival spirits fight for control of his mouth. And somehow you're caught in the middle of it, hauling a line with one hand while gripping your cutlass with the other, heart pounding like a war drum in your chest, because you've seen this go south before. You've seen cannonballs tear through timber like paper, seen men vanish in sprays of red and splinters, and no matter how many times it happens, it never gets easier, never stops being terrifying, especially when your enemy fights back, which they do, with surprising ferocity, returning fire so quickly it makes you wonder if they knew you were coming all along. And then the first ball hits, cracking through the hull near midship, sending a wave of panic up from below as a Latino, unlucky sailor is crushed instantly. No scream, just a flash and silence, and the battle begins in earnest. Not the kind of battle where you stand in neat lines and trade shots like gentlemen. No, this is chaos, incarnate with smoke thick as fog and screams rising from the deck and blood, mixing with seawater in slick puddles that make footing nearly impossible, and you dodge another blast by sheer instinct, pressing yourself flat against a railing as a cannon misfires behind you, spraying hot sparks into the sky. And already you know this is going badly. Already you can see the unraveling beginning. The helmsman is down. The sails are catching fire in places. The captain is shouting nonsense about boarding them, like sea demons from Neptune's beard, while most of the crew is just trying not to die. And amid all of it, someone cries out that the powder room is taking on water, that the hull is cracking. And now you're choosing between fighting or patching, between manning your station or plugging holes with whatever canvas you can grab. And just when you think it can't get worse, a second merchant ship crests the horizon behind the first, and someone realizes what the captain never did. This was a trap, a deliberate bait laid out by traders who finally learned that not all pirates are sharp enough to smell a double bluff. And your captain, of course, fell right into it like a wide-eyed gull. And now the whole crew is paying for it. And you're cursing yourself for not jumping ship weeks ago, back when the water was calm and the crew still trusted each other. But hindsight, as they say, is about as useful as a leaky lifeboat now. And so you do what you always do. You fight, you scramble, you survive, because that's all piracy ever really was. Not glory, not gold, not freedom, just survival with flair. Survival with salt in your wounds and rust in your soul. And as the ship jerks hard to port under a sudden evasive maneuver one, that makes you wonder if the captain finally came to his senses, or if someone else has taken the wheel. You see a crewman go flying into the sea, arms flailing, swallowed by the waves, before anyone can even shout. And you're reminded again how quickly this life takes, how fast it eats people alive, how the very thing that once felt like adventure is now just a slow, smoky disaster unfolding in real time. And as the fight rages on, you finally get a break in the fog of smoke and noise and see your target, the merchant ship that started all this. And it's not what you expected. Smaller than you thought, barely armed, and yet you're still losing, which says more about your captain than your enemy. And you wonder just briefly if you could survive this, if you could take their ship instead, slip away while the captain is distracted by his own fantasies. Maybe gather the few men who still have sense and start over. But then another blast hits, and the deck beneath your feet explodes into splinters, knocking you back and slamming your head hard against a crate, and for a moment everything goes black. And when you wake, there's silence, and natural heavy silence, and the sky above you is filled with smoke and birds, those same damned seabirds that always show up after the violence, always circling like they know they're next in line. And you sit up slowly, every bone aching, ears ringing, and see what's left of the ship. It's not much, a broken skeleton bobbing in red-tinged water sails, shredded masts, half-sunken bodies, yours or theirs, it's hard to tell, floating in the wreckage. And you realize, bitterly, that this is how it ends more often than not. Not in a blaze of glory or a dramatic standoff, but in chaos, confusion, and the relentless indifference of the sea. And historians still argue whether piracy declined because of the law or because of moments like this, repeated failures, overreaching raids, commanders who had no business leading anything more complex than a barstool conversation. And you think, lying there bruised and bloodied, that maybe they're all right. Maybe the sea just got tired of pirates making fools of themselves. And maybe you are one of the lucky few who get to crawl away from disaster one more time. But as you stagger toward the only remaining longboat, watching your captain scream at a seagull like it owes him money, you know deep down that luck has limits. And this life, this horrible, waterlogged life, is not a matter of if it ends badly, but when. The longboat rocks beneath you, creaking with every wave as you pull away from the wreckage of what used to be your ship. The captain's cries, growing fainter behind you until they're swallowed by the wind and the snapping sound of burning canvas. And you don't look back, not even once, because something in you knows that turning around now might break whatever thin thread of resolve is keeping you from screaming. And instead you row alongside a few other survivors whose names you never bothered to learn, but whose faces you now know better than your own. Their eyes wide and silent, their hands blistered and shaking, as the open sea spreads out before you like an endless blue punishment, and the horizon, once a dream of freedom, now feels more like a wall, a barrier you'll never cross, because you've got no food, no water, no compass, and certainly no plans. It's a leaky lifeboat, and a half-dead crew, and a sun that won't stop staring. And it's in this quiet aftermath that reality starts to settle in, slow and heavy, pressing down on your shoulders like wet sails, because you've made it through another fight. But what now? What next? What future can there be when all you've known is chaos and cannon fire? When every port is either a threat or a trap, and every brother in arms is just another man who might stab you if the purse is light. And so you drift, hour after hour, the oars moving more out of habit than hope, and someone tries to sing, maybe to raise spirits, but the tune dies quickly, choked by thirst and grief. And for a while, the only sound is the splash of water against wood and the occasional groan of a man trying to adjust his position without collapsing, and then like some cruel joke, you spot a shape on the horizon. Not land, no not yet, but another ship sails. Full hull, intact, a proper vessel, and for a brief shining moment your chest fills with something dangerous. Optimism, because maybe they'll take you in. Maybe they're not hostile. Maybe fate hasn't fully turned its back on you just yet. But as they grow closer, and you see the color of their flag, that dark cloth fluttering like a crow's wing, you know better because no merchant sails this deep and no Navy ship would approach. So quietly and suddenly, you're yelling, waving, trying to look less like a threat and more like a pitiful castaway, hoping they'll at least offer water before robbing you blind. But they don't fire, not at first, which is somehow worse, because it means they're thinking, calculating, deciding if you're worth the effort. And when their captain finally appears at the rail, tall and sunburned, with the look that says Hayes seen too much and cared too little, he gives a slow wave and then motions for a boarding rope, and you're hauled up, one by one, too tired to resist, too relieved to care. And it's only after you're on their deck, slumped in the shade, sipping stale water from a tin cup, that you realize what kind of ship this is. Not a savior, not a sanctuary, but another pirate. Crew leaner, harder, better organized, the kind of men who didn't lose their last ship in a fool's raid. And now, you're the stray dogs at their table, tolerated but not trusted, taken in, because you might be useful, and for now you are, because pirates rarely waste good hands. And so begins another cycle, another layer of salt and lies and quiet alliances as you try to figure out how to survive among this new crew without painting a target on your back. And it doesn't take long to see that their captain runs a tighter ship than yours ever did. He doesn't drink during decisions, doesn't scream unless it serves a purpose, doesn't promise gold he can't deliver, but Hayes also colder, more calculating, and the crew reflects that. All sharp eyes and sharper knives, no songs, no laughter, just the efficient grimness of men who've stopped pretending this life is romantic. And maybe that's what keeps them alive, because their raids go smoother, quicker, less noise, more planning, and they know when to run, which is more than your last lot could ever figure out. And you learn, slowly, how to read their moods, how to carry your weight without making waves, how to answer questions without revealing too much about your past, because you're not sure yet if they'd respect your scars or see them as weakness. And every day you wonder if this is finally the crew that breaks the cycle, or if they're just a different kind of curse. The kind that whispers instead of shouts. And as weeks pass and the raids grow bolder, you start to realize something. They're not just after gold or rum or supplies. They're looking for something, a specific ship, or maybe a man. It's hard to tell, because they speak in half sentences and loaded glances, but you hear enough to know there's a score being settled. And suddenly, everything makes more sense. The precision, the secrecy, the long silences when maps are spread out and names are muttered under breath. And one night, while the rest of the crew sleeps, you hear the captain talking to his first mate about the Black Harpy and a debt that was never paid. And you don't know if that's a ship or a woman or both, but you remember hearing the name once, years ago, back in Port Royal, whispered like a warning, like something you should never chase if you value your skin. And now here you are, on a ship full of ghosts, chasing a shadow, and you think, of course, because what else would pirates chase, if not the impossible? And as you drift further from any known coast, you start to see things, or think you do, lights where there should be none, shapes beneath the water that don't belong, Birds that fly in perfect circles for hours, like they're guarding something invisible. And once, in the dead of night, a man on watch swears he heard music coming from the fog, soft and sweet and unbearably sad. And the next morning, Hayes gone. Number note, no blood, just his boots by the rail and the lingering smell of roses. And no one talks about it, not even the captain. But you all feel the shift, the weight in the air. Like the ocean is testing you, seeing how much you'll take before you break. And historians still argue whether such superstitions had any real basis or were just a byproduct of dehydration and fear. But you know better. Now you've seen too much to dismiss anything out of hand. And as the days stretch into weeks and the black harpy remains elusive, the crew grows more restless, more tense, because chasing legends is one thing, but dying for them is another. And you wonder how long before this crew begins to fracture. How long before the whispers turn into mutiny? How long before someone decides the captain's ghost chase isn't worth the risk? And you think maybe, if you play this right, you could be the one to steer it, to take control, to finally have a ship of your own. Not out of greed, but survival. Because you know by now that following captains leads only to wreckage and regret. And maybe it's time you became something else, not a follower, but the one others follow, even if it's just until the next storm, the next battle, the next betrayal. Because in the end, pirates don't retire. They fade or they drown. And if you're lucky, you get to choose which. The sky is bleeding again, not with rain or thunder or any dramatic storm that might at least offer some narrative flair, but with that dull, relentless red of a sun that refuses to set, hanging just above the horizon like a bad omen no one wants to acknowledge. And you're still on this cursed ship, still surrounded by the same crew who've started watching each other too closely and speaking in half sentences, like every conversation is a trap. And you know this feeling, know it deep in your bones. It's the prelude to collapse, the smell of betrayal that always comes before a blade finds someone's ribs in the dark. And as the search for the black harpy drags on with no sign of sail or signal, the silence gets heavier, stretching like rope pulled too tight. And you begin to sense that the crew no longer believes in the captain's mission, if they ever truly did. And even the first mate, once his shadow, now avoids his quarters at night, speaking only when forced, eyes darting like Hayes, already planning his exit. And you just keep doing your job, mending ropes, swabbing decks, steering when told, playing the invisible man, the ghost that no one suspects, because you've learned painfully and precisely that it's the quiet ones who live the longest out here. And while they bicker and question and doubt, you listen and you watch, and slowly you gather names and grudges, tallying loyalties like coins in a ledger. And it becomes clear that the ship is a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. And that spark finally comes one night when a young crewman named Jared Barely, old enough to grow a beard, accuses the quartermaster of hoarding rations. And it's true, of course, because it's always true. But instead of settling it below decks like men who still pretend there are rules, they draw steel right there in the galley. And before you can even take a breath, the cook's ladle is a weapon. The navigator is bleeding from the scalp, and the captain finally steps out of his cabin, not with calm command, but wild eyes and a pistol already raised. And the shot he fires doesn't hit either of the fighting men. It hits the ceiling, sends splinters raining down, and everyone freezes. Not because they fear him, but because they fear what Hayes become. Because in that moment, it's clear to all of you that the man who once steered this crew through storms and blockades is gone, replaced by someone who stares too long at maps that lead nowhere and mutters to himself in a voice too low to understand. And from that night on, the ship fractures not openly, not all at once, but in quiet acts of defiance. Orders delayed, sails trimmed wrong on purpose, men pretending not to hear commands, and the whispers start up again, louder now, reckless, and you let them come to you, nodding just enough, saying just enough, until the plan forms not from ambition, but necessity. Because if someone doesn't take control, this ship will be at the bottom of the sea before another week passes. And you don't want the helm. Not really, but you want to live, and that's enough. And so you wait until the weather turns foul, because storms are the best time to change power. When the crew is soaked and scared, and the captain's voice is drowned out by thunder. And when that moment comes, sails flapping, lightning slicing the horizon, you make your move, not with a speech or a sword, but with a whisper to the helmsman, and a nod to the gunner, and the simple, clean push of the captain's back when he leans too far over the rail, and there's no scream, just a splash. And when the storm clears and the sun rises over calm waters, no one asks where the captain went. No one looks overboard. And when you step up to the helm and say you'll steer until landfall, they let you not because they believe in you, but because they're tired, and maybe that's the most honest kind of command there is. And the funny thing is, once you're in charge, everything gets easier. The ship stops creaking like it's cursed, the men stop brawling in the galley, and even the wind seems more cooperative. And you wonder, just a little, if the sea itself was waiting for this. If the ocean only gives its favor to those willing to take what they want without asking. And under your watch, the ship becomes leaner, smarter, quieter. You stop chasing ghosts, stop throwing men at hopeless fights. Start choosing targets with precision and retreating when the odds aren't right. And the gold starts flowing again. Not mountains of it, but enough to silence doubts, to fill bellies, to keep the crew's knives sheathed. And for the first time in a long time, you sleep through the night without keeping one eye open. And it's during one of these nights, with the ship anchored in a hidden cove, and the crew ashore drinking and dancing around a fire, that an old man approaches from the jungle. Not a threat, just a curiosity, hunched and smiling and speaking a language only half of your men understand. And he offers you a map, not a joke, not a trap, but an actual map, faded and torn, with markings you recognize because they match ones you saw long ago in your first captain's log. And your breath catches because you realize what this is. The final clue, the missing piece, the last lead to the Black Harpy. And suddenly, all the stories come rushing back. Not just rumors or nightmares, but real names, real ports, real debts unpaid. And you sit there, the fire casting shadows on the sand, and you think, do I follow this? Do I chase the legend one last time? Not for vengeance or legacy, but just to know, to see if the myth is real, to see if it was ever real. And the next morning, you make your choice, and the ship sets out again. Not because the crew demanded it, but because you did. And for once, they don't question it, because by now, they believe in you. Or at least, they fear you. And either one is enough. And for days you sail, past familiar waters and into the unknown. Through reefs no sane navigator would dare. Past islands that don't appear on maps. And one night you see it just as the old man set a silhouette on the horizon, blacker than the night sky, sails shaped like wings. And it's there, real, anchored in a bay no one should be able to reach. And your men don't cheer, don't shout, just stand in silent awe, and you drop anchor nearby, heart pounding like it did in your earliest days, and you board with a small team, stepping onto a deck that feels more like a grave than a ship, every board groaning under your boots, every door leading to silence, and below decks you find what you expected: bodies, ancient, perfectly preserved, faces frozen in fear or rage, and a logbook, just one, brittle and moldy but intact. And you read it under lamplight, and you learn the truth that the Black Harpy wasn't sunk or stolen or cursed, was abandoned, purposefully, by a captain who saw what greed does to men and chose to disappear. And you wonder if that was wisdom or cowardice. And as you return to your own ship, crew silent behind you, you know this. Legends don't end. They fade. They rot. And maybe that's better than burning out in blood and fire. And when you set sail again, it's not with a new map or a new goal. It's with the quiet knowledge that you've seen the edge of the world. And now, all that's left is to drift. So now, the sea settles, the sails slacken, and the stars begin to bleed through the last threads of fading twilight above your ship as it drifts slowly, gently, as if even the ocean knows the story is over, or at least too tired to turn another page. And you lean back, arms folded behind your head, eyes tracing constellations you've learned by accident. Their names long since lost to time, but familiar in shape like old scars, and the hush that hangs in the air is heavier than silence. It's the kind of stillness that only comes after everything has been said and done, after every sword is sheathed, every debt is paid, and you can almost forget the salt burn in your eyes, the bruises on your ribs, the ghosts in your wake. Because for the first time in what feels like lifetimes, there's no storm on the horizon, no mutiny below deck, no captain raving at shadows. Just you, the dark, and the slow lull of waves licking against the hull like a lullaby. And if you let your eyelids dip just a little, the creak of the timbers and the whisper of the wind through the rigging might sound like a voice. Not shouting orders or singing shanties, but humming something older, deeper, something that reminds you that long before pirates, before empires, before even names, the sea was already here, always watching, always waiting. And maybe that's all this story ever was, not a tale of glory or doom, but a soft warning. A whispered reminder that no matter how far you sail or how loud your cannons roar, the ocean doesn't remember you, doesn't need to, because in the end, it always outlives the men who tried to conquer it.